Hey guys, it's Sarah. Today's video is going to be all about my favorite drugstore makeup brushes. This video was actually requested by a subscriber named Julia, and I realized that I hadn't done a video like this on my channel. I may have done one a long time ago, but I haven't done an updated version in a very long time. So the vast majority of the brushes I use are drugstore, and the main brands that I love are e.l.f, Ecotools, and some Real Techniques, but honestly most of these are e.l.f. I have a ton of brush favorites from them, so I'm just going to be sharing my most used brushes. These are the brushes that I find myself reaching for almost every day, if not every day. I've got eye brushes, face brushes. Let's just dive into it. Typically for foundation, I actually use sponges, and I thought I would go ahead and share my sponge favorites as well because I feel like they're kind of used interchangeably with brushes. And I have 3 favorite sponges to share, so just pick whichever one is most easily accessible to you. Right now I have the e.l.f. sponge. This is like the, oh my gosh, I can never remember the name of this, hang on. Total Face Sponge, and also the Real Techniques sponge. You've probably seen this one. Whoa, I just realized this feels like there's something solid in there. But I've never noticed that before, and I've definitely never noticed it when it's wet. It feels like there's like a solid core to it. Interesting. Anyway, that's beside the point. Both of these are really similar shapes. The e.l.f. one is actually still damp right now, so that's why it looks so big. I do feel like the e.l.f. one does get a little bit bigger than the Real Techniques one. Both of these are great. I feel like I like the e.l.f. one just a little bit better. I feel like it cleans up a lot easier, and it has not had any tears yet, and I've washed it a lot so far. So this one seems to hold up better than the Real Techniques. My Real Techniques one has a lot of little tears in it. Now, I don't feel like that actually affects the application though, so it's not really a huge deal to me, but I have noticed it tore within like the first couple of washes. So either way though, they both perform pretty similarly. I think I like the e.l.f. one just a little bit more though. I noticed that this one really does not sheer out the product too much. That can happen a lot with sponges. I feel like they can sort of sheer out the coverage of your foundations and concealers, but I feel like the e.l.f. one does not do that nearly as much as other sponges. But I don't feel like that's a huge problem with the Real Techniques one either. So anyway, I love both of those. The other one I like that I don't have right now is the Ecotools Sponge. It's a green sponge. That one is a little firmer. If you prefer a slightly firmer sponge, it's not terribly firm to like where it's like rock hard, but it is just slightly firmer. I loved the shape of that one though, and I've been wanting to repurchase it just because it's a really nice shape. Honestly, those 3 sponges are all, I would say, my favorites, so just pick whichever one you can get your hands on the easiest. Okay, moving on to all my brush favorites, I wanted to add all these brushes are from cruelty-free brands, and they're all vegan as well. They don't use animal hairs. So first I'll start off with the foundation brush. I normally use a sponge. I've just been going through a sponge phase for the past like year or so, but the foundation brush that I really like is from e.l.f. It's their Ultimate Blending Brush. It's just like a kind of domed kabuki brush, and it's a nice dense brush. It's very soft, and if you like a foundation brush, this one is great. I would definitely recommend it. These are the brushes that I use to set my under eye concealer, and I even use them to set all over my face whenever I'm just sort of setting smaller areas as opposed to my entire face. But I use both of these interchangeably. I have the e.l.f. Small Tapered Brush and the e.l.f. Highlighting Brush. The e.l.f. Highlighting Brush is just a little bit, the bristles are just a little bit longer, and I almost prefer the highlighting brush a little bit more for setting the under eyes, but they both work really well. And I've been using these for setting my under eyes for years. It's like the only thing I use for that, and they work great. This is an under eye concealer brush. This one I actually just recently repurchased a new one. I used to have one of these, and I felt like after a few years of washing it over and over again, the bristles got kind of rough, and so it just wasn't performing the same way as it had in the past. So this may not be one of those brushes that's gonna last you for like 10+ years. But this is their Flawless Concealer Brush. This is a new, like, fresh one, and I love it now. Now that I have a new one, I feel like certain concealers just perform better with a sponge. Certain ones you can use with a brush or a sponge or your fingers. I really like this with my Jordana Take Cover Concealer, which is my favorite concealer. It's like holy grail status. I feel like it blends it out really seamlessly. It's not very streaky, and yeah, it's just a good brush. So if you like a concealer brush over a sponge, I would definitely recommend this one. And then a powder brush from e.l.f. This is just great for all over setting powder. You could also use it for bronzer, blush, really whatever you want. But this is their Complexion Brush. I've also had this one for years. I've probably had this since way before I even started my channel. and it has held up through countless washes, still just as good as it ever was on day one. So yeah, that's just a good like classic fluffy face brush. Okay, so a bronzer brush that I really like. This is almost like a duo-fiber stipple brush, but it's a really large one. This is from Ecotools, and I think this is called their blending and bronzing brush. And I just really like this for applying bronzer. I feel like it applies it in a nice like diffused way, and I never get like harsh lines with my bronzer. Sometimes with other brushes that are more dense than this, I just have a harder time blending out my bronzer, especially on my fair skin tone. But this, it just does a great job. I used it today for my bronzer. I feel like this could also work really well with cream bronzers, but I don't really own any cream bronzers, so I can't say for sure. But I know Jessica Braun likes this brush for that. I saw that she discovered this maybe within the last year or so, and I was so excited to see somebody else talking about it because I felt like no one else really talked about this brush. But it's just a good brush. I really like it. Ecotools brushes, I would have to say out of all the drugstore brushes from e.l.f, Ecotools, Real Techniques, I feel like Ecotools might be my favorite brand. I don't have as many Ecotools brushes as I do from other brands, but these are the best like quality brushes, I think. I have some eye brushes that I'm going to talk about from Ecotools that I have owned for 10 plus years, and they are still working really well for me. This, I've definitely had this for a few years and it's still performing great. It feels just so well made. So I just have to give a special shout out to Ecotools because I just think they do a great job with their brushes and their sponge. Another Ecotools brush I love, this is their blush brush. This is like the only blush brush I ever use. This is their precision blush brush. I've also had this definitely since before I started my channel. And it's just the perfect size and shape blush brush for me. It's dense enough that it picks up enough product, but it just blends it out nicely. It's the perfect size for my cheeks. I have kind of a small face and I don't feel like it ever like takes over my face. I love this blush brush. Very basic shape and everything, but it's good. And same thing, I just feel like this has lasted so long, and it literally looks like I haven't even had it that long, but I've had it for so long. The only way you can tell I've had it for a while is that the writing has worn off on the handle, but everything else looks perfect. Amazing. Another brush that I like for bronzer and blush, just like cheek products I guess, is from e.l.f. This is their Flawless Face Brush. It's kind of similar to the Ecotools one in size, but it's a little bit more tapered. So I like this for bronzer. I probably use it just as often as I use this Ecotools like stipple brush. Just, it kind of depends on my mood. This one's just a little bit larger and rounder, so just depends on my mood. I like both. And this one also works well for blush. If I'm traveling and I need like one brush to do bronzer and blush, I'll just take this one because it's a good shape for both. Okay. The highlight brush that I have loved, this is absolutely my holy grail highlighter brush. I cannot imagine anything being better than this. This is from Real Techniques. This is their setting brush. The name, with the name setting brush, obviously you could use this for setting your under eyes, but I just think this is the perfect highlighter brush. This is a lot of people's favorite highlighter brush for a reason. It has the perfect amount of taper to it. I have another highlighter brush from ColourPop that I also like, but it just doesn't have as much taper to it. So I feel like I always get just like the perfect application of highlight with this. It just does such a good job. It's the one I cannot imagine being without this. I really can't. Moving on to eye brushes now. So the eyeshadow shader brush that I've been using for forever, since I think Emily Noel used to talk about these in the very early days of her channel. This is just their $2 eyeshadow brush. It used to be $1, now it's $2, whatever. But I have two of them. It's very rare that I have two of the same brush. I usually just, I don't know, I'm a little bit of a minimalist with my brushes. I mean, not really, because I do have quite a few, but I prefer to just have one of every kind. But with this, I feel like it's necessary to have two. I just use this to pack eyeshadow all over the lid. The one that I've had for longer, this one I've had for ages and ages, I feel like this one has a little more taper on the side, which I like better than the newer one. So I'm hoping maybe my newer one is just, that was just kind of a fluke, I'm not sure. But either way, they both work great for just packing shadow all over the lid. That's like my go-to everyday shader brush. I use this brush every single day that I wear eyeshadow. I've got to mention these Ecotools brushes now. These brushes I've had for so long. This was probably one of the first like makeup things that I bought when I was first getting into makeup at the beginning of high school. So I've had these for definitely over 10 years now. These came in a brush set that was sold years ago. They don't sell that exact set anymore, but I think they still sell like a version of each of these brushes. So I'll try to find a link to all of them, but I use all of these brushes all the time. This one is called, well, it's labeled as their Crease Brush. I use this to highlight my brow bone. It's sort of like a fluffy angled brush. That's just what I've always used it for. I never felt like it was quite right for the crease. I felt like this brush set, they had odd names and I always used them for other things than what they were labeled as, but this is just a really good size for my brow bone, and it's also, since it's fluffy, I'm able to use it to sort of blend out my crease as well with that sort of blending eyebrow shade. So that is amazing. It's a very unique brush. I feel like this is not a style of brush that you find all the time. Then there's their highlight brush, which I use as a crease brush. It's a very standard crease brush. This is such a nice fluffy crease brush. Something about this brush just makes me really happy. I love a good fluffy crease brush. I think that's my favorite type of brush. They're just like, you know, they're nice. Then I have their shade brush. This is like a teeny tiny shader brush. I will use this sometimes for just like detail work on the lid, the inner corner, or as like a smudge brush on my lower lash line. It's a little too small to use as like a lid shader brush for like all over the lid, but it's good for detail work. And then there's smudge brush, which I use this all the time in my inner corner. This is like my inner corner brush. I always use it for that. I can't believe these brushes are still hanging around. The bristles, honestly, they look like they've been washed plenty of times. They definitely don't look brand new, but they still work like they're brand new. And they're still super soft, and I just cannot get over how long these ridiculous brushes have lasted me. I feel like I should like frame them eventually once I decide to stop using them, or once they bite the dust. I just feel like these are like a relic in my makeup collection. Like, these started off the journey for me. A couple of e.l.f. brushes. Now, I am someone who absolutely needs like a smaller crease brush as well. I don't necessarily have small eyes. I've been told I have big eyes, and I don't know if I agree with that, but I feel like our perspective of ourselves is usually kind of skewed. I don't know. Anyway, I do feel like I can tend to get kind of messy with just a regular sized crease brush, especially when I'm working with shades in the outer corner and the outer V. And so these two brushes from e.l.f. have been lifesavers for me. The first one is just their crease brush, that's just what it's called, and then the other one is their detail crease brush. Both are kind of small crease brushes. Like, compared to this Ecotools brush, they're both smaller. So I love both of these. I use both of these all the time. The detail crease brush is great for like not only laying product down in the outer corner, but getting it blended too. Like, you still get a nice blended application with this because it's kind of wispy and, you know, I wouldn't say fluffy because it's really small, but it's wispy and soft enough that it just diffuses everything out really nicely, even though it's small. And honestly, same with the crease brush. It just kind of depends on what I am needing, which one of these I choose, but they're both nice, like, small crease brushes. I would recommend both, especially if you have small eyes, especially if you struggle to get your eyeshadow placed just right without it getting messy and all outside the lines. Once I started using these brushes, I felt like my eyeshadow skills like improved so much, even though it was really just the brushes I was using. So the last eye brush I wanted to mention, it's not one that I use all the time, but it's kind of a special brush. This is from Real Techniques, and it's their base shadow brush. The reason it's special is because of the shape and just everything. So it is flat, it is pinched in, but it's also very tapered and fluffy, much like a crease brush. It's almost like they took a nice fluffy wispy crease brush and just pinched it in here. So now it's like a flat blending brush. I use this for a lot of different things. Whenever I'm doing like a wash of just a matte shadow all over, this is a really good brush for that. I think I used this in my full face of Shop My Stash items when I was doing like an all like peach monochromatic shadow all over the lid. This is what I use because it lays down the product really well just due to the taper of it, but it also blends really well just because it's so fluffy. So it's kind of like a 2-in-1 shader brush and blending brush. So it's just great for like one shadow looks. It's also nice for like laying down a shadow in the outer part of the lid if you're going for just a more blended look and you're not working with like super dark colors. Yeah, it's just kind of a nice brush. I feel like you could do an entire look with just this brush just because it serves so many different purposes. So those are all of my most used drugstore makeup brushes. Most of these I use every day. I really don't think you need to spend a lot of money on brushes. Now, I'm not somebody who's tried like the nicest professional brushes out there, so I may not be one to talk, but I'm just saying, you can find amazing brushes at the drugstore. So many of these I've had for years. I've washed so many times and they're still working really well. So I hope this video was helpful, especially if you're just starting out with makeup, you're looking for some brush recommendations. And yeah, I feel like brushes are one of those things that I don't talk about that often on my channel, even though I use them every single day, and you even see me using them in a lot of videos. And you might wonder, like, what brushes are you using? These are usually the ones. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I upload 3 videos a week, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, sometimes more than that. I'd love to see you again very soon, and I will talk to you in my next video. Bye.